What's happened up until this point in Luther's writings on the Lord's Supper, they're really quite delightful in many ways. And I think Reformed readers can read some of the early stuff on Luther's writings on the Lord's Supper, enjoy them. You can read the Small Catechism by Luther, which comes from 1527, 1528, I think, as a Reformed person, and agree with almost everything that's said there, if not everything, because it picks up on the early emphasis. Luther's early emphasis was all on promise. He took the presence for granted. It wasn't an issue. He didn't have to argue for that. So he could focus on the Lord's Supper as we would say as Reformed believers, sealing the promise on the heart. The Lord's Supper is something that presses the gospel home in physical form on us. So when I read early Reformation Luther on the Mass, I find it to be great stuff because the accent is on promise. What happens after Karlstadt, the Karlstadt debacle, and then the emergence of Zwingli with his symbolic understanding, is that Luther refocus his attention on what we might now call the metaphysics of presence, or the nature of predication in the Lord's Supper. What is meant when Christ says, "This is my body, this is my blood"? Is it, as Luther thinks, to put it somewhat crudely, a literal statement? Or is it, as Luther argues, a symbolic statement? Again, we might, as Reformed or evangelicals, step back and say, well, what's the big deal? Well, the big deal is this. For Luther, Zwingli's taken Christ out of the sacrament.
Yeah.
And he's turned the sacrament from something that does something for us, that seals the gospel on our heart, that strengthens our faith, into something we do. Either something we do as an aid memoir that casts our mind back to Calvary, or binds us together with other believers. But it's not something that God does for us anymore. It's something we do for God. And here's the twist. That makes it akin to the Mass for Luther.
Right.
Because for Luther, the direction in the sacrament is from God to us. What's the problem with the Mass? The priest offers the elements up to God. What's the problem with Zwingli? Zwingli's doing something for God. So the irony is that the Mass and Zwingli are, for Luther, kind of two sides of the same coin, with this one difference. If you've got to make a choice, the Mass is better, because at least they think Jesus is there.
Yeah.
So Zwingli is like the Mass.
It's even worse than the Catholics.
Only worse than the Catholics.
Right.
I had a little taste of this a couple of years ago when I was invited to speak at a Lutheran conference at the Concordia Seminary in Fort Wayne, where I was the only Reformed guy in this room, about 400 Lutheran pastors and theologians. And it was fascinating talking to Ron Ritgers afterwards, one of their professors of systematics, about how he was involved in ecumenical discussions with Roman Catholics in a way that he would never consider being in ecumenical discussion with the Reformed, because the issue is Christology for them. Christology relating to the Lord's Supper. That's the primary focus. So it's, the background to the colloquy is not a trivial one. It's a serious theological issue.